Hi there.
Katie.
Um, so let's just get started with you telling us a little bit about who you are and about your practice and the work that you do.
Sure. Want to acknowledge that I am sitting next to a thunderstorm, so there may be background noise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my name is Jenna. I use they or he pronouns. And I'm a white transmasculine non-binary full spectrum doula and educator. Typically, I describe myself and my work a lot more in depth, and that can be accessed in other spaces. But I know we're here just to kind of do a little overview and hello. So a little bit about my practice is that while I do full spectrum work, meaning I support people preconception all the way through pregnancy outcomes of various kinds into postpartum, I'm also passionate about taking that model of care to all kinds of life transitions, transformations. Um, and the education work that I do spans from education that I do with my clients around the kinds of systems and experiences that they're navigating, as well as education and consulting that I do with other birth professionals, family professionals, professionals at large in all kinds of different fields around trans inclusion. And I run a mentorship program too, and do some content creation. So, a little bit of everything.
Truly a birth worker of many hats.
Try.
What are you queering right now?
Oof. What am I not queering?
Fair.
Before we started recording, we were just touching on kind of some larger conversations about being community with people and sharing space and what to do when conflict comes up. And I think like queering conflict resolution feels really important to me right now. As we're recording this, whatever month it is, September of 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic and social movement, and that as birth workers, as reproductive workers, I feel it's our responsibility to be kind of in the middle of all that. It's part of the work. It's central to our work. It's the foundation of our work. Um, right? Reproductive justice being intertwined through all of that. So I think like for me, queering that kind of conflict resolution as these really uncomfortable, difficult conversations constantly come up in the work that I do looks like being non-binary about how we see everything, right? There's not a right and a wrong right now. Yeah, so I don't know, I'm queering everything, but that's what I feel most excited to be queering right now, I think.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Love that lens. And like so necessary. Um, Such a place where so often we get stuck in like conflict for so many people, sends people into binary thinking, and to be queering conflict resolution or conflict transformation in that way is so generative. What inspired you to do the work that you do?
Um, I feel like for so many folks who end up doing birth work or reproductive work, not to be binary about it, right? But there's like these camps of like either you've gestated a pregnancy to term, and that's what kind of drew you into this work, or you haven't, and then like it feels like a bigger why or like how to answer when people ask. Um, there's a good one. I think in parts I was inspired to do this work because of my own experiences, both as someone who has accessed abortion as a trans person and just my experiences as a trans person navigating day-to-day life in addition to care systems, and in part by my community, right? Like, especially as I got older and I was already in spaces where I was serving as an educator, having discussions with people about their holistic wellness. As I got a little bit older in those roles, more of the folks that I was in community with were having children, and kind of hearing about their experiences, especially, but not only the experiences of folks in shared queer community, just being like really distraught for them and alongside them, and knowing that it didn't have to be that way, and wanting to um, do whatever I could to make it different. Oh, hi, Kitty.
Yeah, Truffle's here. This is Truffle. She's gonna just show off a little bit.
So yeah, I feel a little bit like I was called into it by others, and part just kind of that overused idea that we want to be the change that we want to see in the world, but some layer of truth to that.
Absolutely. There's like that nugget of resonance in the like overused or in the sort of thing that has become more cliche. How do you describe your support philosophy?
Person-centered is what I always say, and I feel like increasingly over the last year especially, that's become more and more of like a buzz term, which makes me very frustrated. But yeah, I think it's right up there along with like trauma-informed and trans-inclusive in terms of buzzwords. But yeah, I don't expect anyone to show up in a particular way, regardless of the type of experience they're moving through or what their identities look like from the outside, what their support system looks like from the outside. I don't expect them to think or feel anything in particular as a specific set of needs until they've had the space to explore what those needs are and communicate them with me. And so that's what person-centered means to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've asked you a little bit about your natal work, but I also now need to ask you about your natal chart. What's your sun, moon, and rising?
I'm a Leo sun, Aquarius moon, Virgo rising. I'm an Enneagram type 8.
Okay.
ENFJ.
Just throwing them all in.
Just so you get a sense of who I am.
Did you say Leo sun?
Gosh.
Oh my, wow.
Middle of it.
Yeah. Wow. I love the throwing in of the, like, you can start asking everyone about their Enneagram now.
I just always ask my clients, like, what, like, how do you understand yourself, right? Like, what, I don't care what framework they use. If they want to tell me their Harry Potter house, that's fine too, right? They can use any system for self-awareness, but I'm like, how do you make sense of who you are? Is it astrology? Is it Myers-Briggs? Like, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. And what's your favorite thing about being a queer and non-binary support person, or about supporting queer and trans families?
I think that, and this is a generalization, and there are some generalizations I feel perfectly fine making. This is one of them. The like amount of intention that goes into family building. Obviously, there are some queer families and queer couples who have the genetic material within their family or within their couple to conceive. And there are also many that don't. And there are often like additional steps, additional choices to be made along the way. And I just don't find that level of intention is a given for many people who are family building. And I appreciate that working and centering my work around trans and queer experience means that that's generally who I get to work with. And when I do work with folks who are not LGBTQ themselves, that's really what I'm looking for, right? In terms of being a birth worker and doing this kind of deep relational work with people. There's a lot of conversation in communities that do this work about burnout. And I found that the hardest thing, the thing that contributes the most to my burnout, is working with folks who are going through the motions and not really willing to even give themselves space to identify what their preferences or their needs are. And I don't find that to be the norm with working with LGBTQ families. I find that the norm is there is a lot of intention already. So let's tap into that and like just kind of keep peeling the layers back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I'm sure that there's a long list of answers to this question, but if you could improve one thing about the experience of pregnancy and birth for LGBTQ plus folks and families, what would it be, or where would you start?
So I think like you already acknowledged, there's so many ways to answer this question. And it's really tempting to say things like, I want it to be more equitable in terms of access to resources, or simple things like access to affirming care, or second parent adoption, for that to not even be a thing, or for it to be more accessible if it has to be a thing, right? But to me, I think some of those answers lend themselves towards this like assimilation into cultures, structures, norms that we already know are a disservice to most people, queer or not. And so I think where I would want to start is liberation for everybody, queer or otherwise. And like, what's exciting, what's hard about that answer is that there is no clear answer. And what's exciting about it is there's so many possibilities. It's like an imagination question. Like, what would a liberated experience for queer and trans families be around pregnancy, birth, or life in general?
Yes. So energizing. Oh, I adore that answer. Truffle does too. Very pro-liberation. And oh wow. She's also bringing her own thunder today. What's a piece of advice that you have for new or aspiring queer and trans birth workers?
Find community. We can't do this work in isolation. And there's you and I both know there's so many of us doing this work, and it's really, really exciting. And like, in seeking folks who are interested in doing similar work, who have similar identities, at least on paper, maybe some similar experiences, maybe even some similar value systems and frameworks for understanding not just the work they do, but the way that they see the world. Even with all of those similarities, expect there to be like conflict, and expect there to be disagreement, and like, don't let that be discouraging. And I think like conflict and comparison, once people like are stepping into this work, and seeking community and making connections and finding spaces that feel resonant, they can really easily, and I see this in my mentorship program all the time, like get trapped in this place where either comparison or conflict stops them, right? And so just also seek out the type of care that you need to support yourself through those discomforts, because they will come up.
Ooh, the framework of like comparison or conflict being barriers for folks is like, so what a helpful naming. And I know you have many projects floating around in your work. Are there any that you want help cross-pollinating with others that are in the community?
Yeah, so Ray Racklin of Refuge Midwifery and I are working on a directory not unlike LGBTQ birth, but that's trans-centered specifically. So that's both a provider directory and a place for queer conception stories to live. So it's called queerconceptionstories.com. And I think we're seeking definitely more submissions in terms of stories and providers for the directory. I also think that more largely, like, I hear so many of, myself included, of this community of queer and trans birth workers expressing the desire to specifically apply this model of care to gender transition, social or medical. And like, all of us have that, and I think have shown up in that work in different ways in our own communities. And there's a few organizations that are doing that work in a more structured way, but I would love to see collaboration around like, okay, like, let's actually make that happen on a large scale, in a really like cohesive, collaborative way. So that's just like a seed that I like to plant any chance I get.
Yes. Yeah. Ooh. Definitely something that I want to watch blossom. Yes. What else?
Well, just that, like, in that there's so many facets too, where I find myself reaching out to different kinds of professionals all the time. Like, someone planted the seed in my head of, for a lot of trans people, it's really important to have a living will, especially, but not only if your name, your gender don't align with things like your legal gender marker or your legal name. And so like, I've reached out to lawyer friends and been like, what would it be like to like create a system for this to be a free service for trans people? So I think like there's just all of these really awesome possibilities if we pool our resources and like put our heads together to come up with systems for making these kinds of obstacles that we know are unfair and unjust a little bit easier to traverse for people. So just naming that, I think we need to like call in more than just birth workers, but
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, that's something that's like very dear to my heart with like my spiritual care hat on. Like I've worked as a hospital chaplain and I've seen the places where like because of like who gets listed on advanced directives or people who have never made them, didn't know they needed one, and then suddenly the hospital next of kin hierarchy says like, okay, well your mom now gets to make all of your medical decisions regardless of whether or not you've spoken to your parents in however long. And certainly like I've seen that play out in like really uncomfortable ways professionally, and certainly so many people have so many personal experiences of being in those situations. Yeah, so important. And I mean, I guess that's also possibly one answer to this question, but what are other things that are like not natal or reproductive focused about you and your life that you want to share?
I think I fall into the category of like my work is also so deeply meshed with my identity that it can be hard to say. But pre-pandemic, I like I've sung in multiple queer choirs, so I love to do that. I go to stand-up comedy open mics and try my hand at that. So there's places that I find I can take off, like the identity of doula for a second and set it down and bring some more levity into a life and a lifestyle that can be really heavy. And so I love that. And I'm also like, before getting into doula work, I was an environmental educator. So of course, like spending time outside, being around animals, gardening, all things that I love. Yeah. And then I think like, in terms of not natal but still like adjacent, right, if everything is reproductive justice, which I do believe, just contributing to community organizing efforts, mutual aid efforts when and where I can and how I can with the resources that I have, feels like it overlaps with work and also is distinctly separate from the kind of direct client care that I do as a birth worker.
Yeah, I am so excited about your post-pandemic stand-up sets. Wow.
I've written like 3 jokes during this pandemic. It's been rough, y'all. I've tried. It's been hard. We'll come out the other side.
And until that happens, where can people find you on the internet?
Not making jokes. I still try.
Not making jokes. Where can people find you being very serious on the internet?
So because I'm really, really not gifted at introducing myself, I haven't even named that my practice is Love Over Fear.
We'll link it at the beginning. It's gonna be fine.
So at Love Over Fear Wellness on Instagram or Facebook, and loveoverfearwellness.com is where folks can find me.
All right, Jenna, thank you so much. This was such a delight.